Hey, I'm Matt with Meat Church. Let's fire up Geraldine and smoke a brisket. Well, welcome to part 4 of our 3rd annual Hardcore Barbecue series, where we cook all the classics in this YouTube playlist. We've also got tons of brisket videos already, so this will go in that playlist as well. But as I mentioned, obviously we're cooking today on my prized possession, my Millscale offset smoker. But for those of you that don't have offsets, while we're gonna talk a lot about offsets, you can definitely apply this lesson to any type of cooker you have, whether it be pellet grill, Kamado grill, 2-zone fire in a kettle, whatever the heck you have, or even if you cook in your oven, all this will apply, because I'm actually going to show you how I trim my briskets. It's what I consider a Texas style restaurant trim to leave you with an amazing product at the end to cook so that every bite is great, and it's going to be a ton of fun. So let's get at it. So let me grab my brisket. I'm obviously not in my outdoor kitchen today, so I always say, big tip, cold as possible on your briskets. The colder the brisket, the sharper the knife, the better the experience you're gonna have. So big tip there. This is a 44 Farms prime brisket, 44 out of Cameron, Texas. I'm trying not to cut my pretty cutting board with this super sharp Montana knife, fillet knife. All right, let's talk about what we got here. Full packer brisket, gorgeous marbling. Didn't have the weight on it. I'm guessing this is probably 16-ish, maybe 17 pounds. When I'm looking for a brisket, I like to buy between 15 and 18 pounds because I'm going to trim it down pretty aggressively, and I want big, thick slices. So I look for a pretty shape, and then down here on the flat brisket, 2 muscles flat, point underneath. But on the flat, I want it as thick as possible right here to get some really nice slices out of it. So overview of how I'm going to trim this brisket, and then I'm going to jump into it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the decal, the hard fat here that connects the 2 muscles together. I'm going to flip the brisket over. I'm going to make what I call a little mohawk right here, and I'm actually going to remove this entire section to get rid of this big fat pocket and to kind of flatten the brisket out, make it nice and even. A really even brisket will cook a lot better. Then I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to shave the fat down here on the edge. So on the fat side, you're looking at fat right through here. I want to get that down to about 1/4 inch. And then lastly, I'm going to shape it. I'm going to kind of flatten it out, and I'm going to straighten this out, cut off this really thin part. And that's an optional step. I'll talk about that when I get there. But if you don't trim that off, that is going to overcook and be dry, which, you know, it's your choice if you do it. I always say your kids or neighbors, you know, might like that. But again, I'm going to show you a Texas barbecue joint trim that leaves you with a brisket that when you slice it, every slice is great. And I believe in full utilization of an animal, so we're not going to waste anything. So I don't make any apologies for how aggressively I'm going to trim this, because I will take the fat, I will grind it up in a grinder, and then I'll set it in a pan next to my brisket and render a beef towel out of that. And then I'll take the meat, and I'll make an 80% meat and a 20% fat pile. I'll grind that up and make the most amazing hamburger meat. You can use it in sausage, guisada, all sorts of things. You all have uses for hamburger meat. So we also have a brisket trim video. I will put that, a link to that as well, but this ought to be all you need. So let's get at it. All right, here we go. We're just gonna remove this decal. Might take a couple passes. And on the fat, on the meat side, you don't have to remove every little piece of fat that you see here. What I do is I'm just looking around to see if anything is kind of hard and sticking up. And if so, I may kind of flay it away, but that's not that big a deal, because ultimately we're going to cook this brisket fat side up, meat side down. So this softer fat right here will render away, so you don't have to sweat that too much. None of this is too hard, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm gonna flip it over. With my hands here, I'm gonna pinch this up and kind of make what I called, again, a mohawk, or kind of like a shark fin. Some people just kind of dig this fat out. I don't like that method, because then you're left with 2 pieces of meat that kind of end up looking like a pair of lips and doesn't cook real even. So I'm gonna cut the entire thing out. And if you look at this, that's mostly fat, just a little bit of meat right here, and I'll trim that out and save that for my grind later. I always process all of my trimming after I get my brisket where I want it. So you can feel that, and if you don't think you got enough, you can kind of take another pass. That's still pretty hard, so I'm gonna probably just cut that down just a little bit more. Okay, now before I shave down, what I'm gonna do is make a nice slice to kind of clean the edges up. And now you can really see that fat a lot better, and you can see where it's really thick here. I prefer to shave this direction, but that's just a preference thing. This is just an experience thing, and I tell people, trim slowly, because you can always take more away, but you can't add it back. If you trim too fast, get too aggressive, you're gonna scalp it, which, you know, I'm likely to do, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Just take your time with it. And when I think I'm about done, before I clean it up, I'm gonna run my hands over it and feel it. Anything that feels really thick or hard, keep trimming there, because hard fat just won't render down. Okay, now I'm gonna shape it up. So I'm gonna kind of push the edges out. I like to flip it over so I can see that edge really good, see where anything's hanging over. There's so many ways to do this. It's just whatever works for you. Now I'm gonna shape it up. So we've got a pretty good shape so far. You don't want any points, so I'm gonna round this out right here, and I'm gonna just make a nice trim down here and round this out, and again, get rid of some of that thin stuff. And yep, that's great meat right there, but it's gonna make an amazing hamburger. This used to be an area where I struggled with teaching this, because people say, oh, that's great meat. It is great meat, but ultimately you're talking about maybe a pound or so. And again, there's just so many uses for that I'm not worried about it. But I know I keep repeating it, it's up to you. You decide how much you want to take off of that. Now what we're left with is you've got really nice round edges that aren't gonna burn up in the cook. And you've got a much thicker flat right there. I need to clean that up just a hair. You can see that is a really nice, even brisket now that's gonna cook great, and you're not gonna burn up here. Now when you go to slice the flat, you're gonna have a really thick slice right there, and every bite of that's gonna be great. If you run a barbecue joint in Texas, when you slice brisket, you can't afford to serve a bite that's not amazing, and so that's why we go that far with that. All right, well, it looks pretty good. I'm gonna go get some seasoning so we can get this on to the next step. I'm gonna throw a mustard slather on. This is very common in Texas barbecue, and I'm gonna tell you that don't be afraid of it. Doesn't change the flavor profile, and it is optional. Binders are ways for seasoning to adhere, not only for the seasoning to adhere now, but also to stay adhered during the cook. Lots of my buddies that own Texas Monthly Top 50 barbecue joints do this. It's extremely common. I would say the top barbecue joints do this, so don't turn your nose up at it. But you can slather in whatever you want. And like I say, we're in Texas, by God, we're gonna use Whataburger mustard. Don't need to do too much. I already said I'm gonna cook fat side up, so I'm gonna season the meat side first. So I'm gonna be pretty simple with my seasoning, but what I'm gonna do is I'm going with some just coarse cracked pepper at first. So this is 16 mesh pepper, very common in Texas barbecue. And I go with this first because black pepper catches smoke, will help you build bark. And I like to put my bigger seasonings on first. I started saying this lately. People ask why. If you're gonna layer seasonings, put the big ones on first, frankly, so they don't bounce off. Get your edges. I like black pepper. but you season whatever flavor profile is your favorite and whatever you like. Then we're gonna hop over and just pat it on here, back to the meat side, and I'm going with our Holy Cow. So our number one rub, it's my OG. Holy Cow is salt, pepper, garlic. It's mostly salt and pepper. So Texas barbecue is known to be salt and pepper, but I'm here to tell you it is usually not just salt and pepper. There are places that do that. I would say there are more Texas Monthly Top 50 barbecue joints that use a little something extra. And this has a little garlic, and I have yet to run into someone that is gonna complain about that. Be sure to get the edges. You can also use the board to get the edges, which I'll do here in just a minute. Pat it on. Repeat the process. Nice and simple. So how far in advance should you do this? Well, you know, I teach barbecue, and a lot of the feedback I get is a lot of people just don't plan, and they basically do this and throw it on the pit. That's okay if you want to, but give yourself at least an hour or do it overnight. I love to tell people, you know what? Season this thing on Friday night if you're cooking on a Saturday. This is how you can use the board, by the way, if you want to get those edges. No problem doing your trim like this. Do your trim like this on a Friday night if you want. Throw it in the fridge in a pan with foil over it, let it ride all night, and then cook it the next day. So we're gonna let this sit here for a little bit. I'm gonna go check on my fire, get my mill scale rocking at 250, and then we'll get into cooking. All right, let's talk about cooking. But first things first. Brisket is really simple to me. If you follow just a few key tips, it's really not that hard to cook. To me, I'm gonna like boil this down to very simplistic terms. It's a two-step process to me. This is about a 40-degree piece of meat, and we're gonna put it in this pit and we're gonna smoke it until it's tender. Now, I always teach, like, use an instant read thermometer to nail your desired final internal temperature or doneness. And that's super important, but I also do a lot of things by feel. Difficult to teach in a video, I will demonstrate that, but an instant read thermometer is your friend ultimately. So hypothetically, we're gonna go from about 40 degrees to 203 degrees in 2 steps. What I like to do is I've got my mill scale running with post oak. Use whatever woods you like, but I cook a Central Texas style barbecue and we use post oak. Other woods I like would be mesquite or hickory, or if you want something with less smoke, pecan. But definitely a hardwood is the way I like to roll. I'm gonna go fat in, 250 degrees, and if you're running an offset, I take the flat end, and I put that towards the firebox. Now, if you're not filling up your entire pit, then stay away from your far right door, get more towards the middle, you know, if you can. And that's how I'm gonna cook my first step. And the first step for me, I'm gonna be visually looking for beautiful bark, letting it get really dark. And ultimately with my instant read, I'm gonna probe right here in the flat, and it's gonna be around 175 internal temperature when I decide to wrap, which takes us to step 2. I'm gonna increase the temp on my pit a little bit at 275. I'm gonna spin the brisket to point towards the fire, and I'm gonna take it to that 203 number, or tender. I'm just hypothetically using 203. Every piece of meat is different. I find that Wagyu briskets usually require a higher internal temperature to be done. But again, I'm gonna show you kind of how to fill it. So it's gonna be pretty simple. So let me go ahead and take this brisket, and put it in the pit, and then we'll go from there. So flat, towards the fire. I'm gonna need some more gloves too, if I can get an assist. I've got a couple that have been cooking. I'm gonna show you guys a couple options on wrap real quick. So on wrapping, when you wanna wrap your brisket, you can go foil or you can go paper. Aluminum foil is a way to get through the second stage quicker. You lose some of that beautiful bark you've built. Paper's permeable, so I like to wrap in paper, but either work. I know great pit masters that do both, so we're gonna do paper today. Let me put some new gloves on here, because I've got a couple briskets that have been cooking for 7 hours. They were about a pound smaller, but they're at 175 because I just checked them. So let me lay it. I use 18-inch butcher paper. It's unwaxed butcher paper. Super cool butcher paper, by the way, because it's got our mascot, Mito Bandito, on it. And I'm just gonna overlap them by about 6 inches or so. Let me grab a brisket. And I'm gonna take cider vinegar and I'm gonna spray this paper around my Miller Lite. This helps you deal with the paper a little easier. And then right where the brisket's gonna go, I'm gonna, it's a nice, good little wet bed there. Lay my brisket down. So I've got an instant read thermometer in my pocket. Got pretty lucky with that one. Right at 175, right here in the flat, so it's time to wrap for me. I also take a little cider vinegar spritz on the top. I did not spritz this brisket whatsoever during the cook. I literally didn't touch it. My goal was a 250-degree fire. Sometimes it was a little hotter, sometimes it was a little lower. That's okay, just trying to average 250. Little tip I'll add in, I didn't do this today, but I actually like to put a brisket in for the first couple hours at about 200 degrees if you can, if you have the time. Let that brisket get in there, kind of hang out, come up to temp a little bit, acquire a lot more smoke. So if time allows, that's something that you guys could do. I gotta move this brisket back just a hair. Okay. A lot of ways to do this, but this is a way that I've always done and a way that works for me. So come over the brisket, I'm gonna lift it up and wrap it nice and tight underneath. And like my friend Leonard from Truth, this is kind of like a paper football. Take your corners nice and tight. And then swaddle a baby. Pull it tight. Tight over the top. You don't want this loose. This is a foolproof way to wrap a brisket. Okay, over, pull it tight. Pull it back over one more time so we got a little extra excess. I'm just gonna fold the excess under. There we go. It's that simple. It's super tight. We're gonna go back in the pit. Now what I like to do, as I said earlier, I like to run my temperature up a little bit, 275 degrees, put the point towards the fire to render out those last fats. You can say at 250 if you want to. There's no one right way to do it. I always say adjust the recipes to kind of like your liking, whatever you have going on in your life. If you don't need this for a while, you can let it ride a little bit longer. So back in we go. And naturally, I have another brisket at that next stage. So let me talk about this. So this brisket, I checked it also right before we fired back up, and it's nice and tender. And I can show you several ways that we check that. But first off, again, difficult to teach on camera, but pick this up and feel it. Like, it is like completely pliable, but you can see the hole I poked in here. With my instant read, I checked here and I was right at 203, and this is the flat. In the flat, this first place I checked, but then I'll always check a couple more places just to kind of make sure. But something that you could start to work on as you cook more of these would be get in here and feel it. So start to open it up. Now we need to let this brisket rest. So we're not ready to slice it. And save that tallow, that's good stuff. I didn't cook with any tallow, but anything that comes out of the brisket, you definitely want to take advantage of that. So at this point, you actually don't need to look at the brisket, but reach your hands underneath here and feel it. Feel all around. I'm telling you right now, there ain't nothing that's tough on this thing. This thing is softer than the pillow I sleep on at night. So I'm pushing underneath. Yeah, difficult to show you on camera, but try this. When you think your brisket's done, reach in here and feel it on the edges. This one's completely soft. So I like it. So I want to wrap it back up, and let's talk about what the heck do you need to do from here. Well, this brisket needs to rest. And let's talk about resting and kind of what's practical. What I find that most people do is they're so anxious to get their brisket cooked and just to eat it. But my good friend Dane Weaver at Dane's Craft Barbecue in Fort Worth, he said something in one of my classes that really stuck with me. He said people focus on the increase in temperature to get it cooked, but I think the decrease in temperature is just as important. You know, if you come to my barbecue schools, I say people want to cook a brisket. They get up early Saturday morning, they want to finish it by 5, and they want to eat it by 6. That's fine. It'll taste beefy, it'll probably be tender, but if you want to know how the best brisket in the world is made, give it a proper rest. What I do here is I leave my brisket out at ambient temperature like this. It's a nice Texas spring day, so it's probably in the 70s. If I take this 203-degree brisket and leave it on this table, I don't want to slice to 140. It'll take nearly 3 hours to go 203 down to 140. The best barbecue joints in the world, they rest down to 140 and then they throw it in a 140-degree warmer all night long until lunch the next day. I know most of you don't have warmers that will do 140. Ovens go down to 175. Pellet grills go to 165. You don't have to do that. It's just a tip to let you know how the best do it. So at a minimum, I would rest it down at ambient temperature to 140. Or if you want to hold it longer than 2-3 hours, then just rest it like this for a few minutes to stop the cook process, and then tuck it away in a Yeti, lock it down, and let it ride in there as long as you can. When you drop below 140, you want to eat it within 2 hours, so just be mindful of that. So we're going to let this rest. I'm going to let it go all the way down to 140, and then we're going to slice it and see how we did. Brisket's rested down, and I'm hungry, so let's see how we did. This is more exciting than Christmas morning. Well, she's barky. Whew, she's still very tender. We're going right on the Pecos table here. Why not? All right, well, if you don't know how to slice a brisket, you can't just slice it all the way end to end. You want to go here where the point and flat meet. And basically you would spin this direction and you would slice like this. But I bet y'all are wondering how we did. Well, let me just show you. Dang, it's juicy. God, it's so insanely tender. I mean, the amount of juice on that. You're not supposed to squeeze your meat, but it is an educational video, so it can just kind of show you. It's like, oops, super juicy. All right, I am going to, actually slicing off the wrong end. That's okay. I went with a pretty thick slice here. I'm gonna go back over here on the more lean. Get a couple slices and just taste it up before we do anything with it. I didn't bring the sharpest knife today. That wasn't the best move I've ever made. But here's my quite big slice. Bam. Man, this sucker is tender. Still a little warm. I'm gonna cut it up here. Way tender. I mean, it's insanely juicy. I'm gonna pull it apart here, get a little sample. I ain't mad at it. The reason I cook fat side up, I like that rendered fat on top. I think that's the best bite in barbecue, to be honest with you. It's close with a beef rib, but top of a brisket is definitely my favorite. Then get in here on the traditional burn ends. Boy, I should have brought a better knife today. It's all right. I'm out at my property and just grabbed some stuff to go, so I don't have all my outdoor kitchen stuff here today. But your little traditional burn in right there, the old school burn in, is really where it's at. That is really freaking good. I said this recently, but that definitely tastes like Texas. Let me show you a little snack I like to make. The simple fold over. If you're not making a fold over, you're not living. This is a big time pit room snack where you've just got a piece of white bread. You throw on some white onions, some pickles. It's called a fold over right there. That's the way you do it. But I'm gonna throw a little mustard on board because I love mustard. The simplicity of this, let me tell you something. This shit's gonna be good. That was the biggest bite in the history of Meat Church YouTube. God, it's so good. I'm a huge fan of that. Y'all gotta make that. Well, this was a ton of fun, super delicious. You can see that the mill scale performed flawlessly. I think they make the best pits in the business, but you can see all the bark on this brisket. I mean, that thing is just more bark than a Doberman. That extra black pepper, holy cow, across the top. That's a Texas brisket through and through right there, made with post oak. I said earlier, it's gonna be in our brisket playlist. It's gonna be in our hardcore barbecue playlist, which is where we have all the classics. Anything barbecue related, that's where y'all can get it. And hey, keep crushing our spring collection on meatchurch.com. All our new swag we drop, you guys have been killing it. We appreciate that. Like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time. Hey guys, well, welcome to the wrap up. No, this is not my outdoor kitchen. We're here actually at TX Whiskey Ranch in the middle of one of my barbecue schools, actually the final barbecue school of the spring schedule. There are 140 people looking on to me right now, and I'm this much nervous. But I love the video, went back and watched it. The brisket turned out great. I wish I took a sharper knife out to our land when we shot that day, but I was just gonna leave you with two things. In the beginning, I told you that we cooked on Geraldine, and you're like, why is your pit named Geraldine? I always want to be different. Half the pits in Texas are named Dolly. First three people I cooked for on that pit, Miranda Lambert, John Randall, and Jack Ingram, and they wrote a song together called Geraldine. And the lyrics of that song are bolted onto that pit. So that's why she's named that. And the only thing I wanted to elaborate further on from the video was I talked a lot about trimming the flat really aggressively so that the end of it was not too thin. But I didn't tell you this. When you leave your flat too thin, if you ever cook a brisket and you see it kind of curl up and you get a pool of juice like on the top of it, well, if that ever happens, it's probably because it's too thin. You can lift the brisket up, just dump the juice off. That's gonna keep, if you don't do that, your bark won't develop in that case. So another reason that you should trim it quite aggressively. Anyway, if you want a little credibility for people that believe in our brisket recipes, take a look at these folks. See y'all next week. How about that? All right.